why don't we get started? And we'll keep admitting the stragglers as they come in. But thank you all for being here. I'm Talia. I'm a partner at Bessemer, and along with Bhavik, we lead a lot of our early stage AI investing. But I know whether you're a public company on this call, a startup with a person, an idea, or somewhere in between, this is a topic that is top of mind for everyone and should be. And we're super excited to have the experts in the space with us, the Cursor team, Jordan and Eric, who we're going to hand the reins over to lead this webinar and this session. We'll go through a demo of Cursor, talk through some best practices, tactics to get the most out of AI code gen broadly and Cursor specifically. We got a bunch of great questions from y'all when you registered, so we'll try and touch on a bunch of those. And then we'll open it up to the group for Q&A. So as things come up, feel free to add them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them if we can. But with that, Jordan, Eric, do you two want to introduce yourselves and take it away?
Let's do it. Let's do it. So great to see everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursdays to come join us here. Really excited to spend a little bit of time together today. My name is Jordan Topoleski, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Cursor. And I'm joined today by Eric Zakariasson, who is a user operations lead on our team, really working with a lot of our development team and a lot of our users around the world. We're both really excited to chat with everybody today. This space feels like it's changing a million miles a minute. And really what we hope to do today is a couple of things. The first is just give a little bit of background around how we've seen this space evolving and how we think about the ways that software engineering is going to change over time. Talk a little bit about the Cursor platform and our theses on where we are today and where this is going to go. A second topic I want to talk about is how do we measure the productivity of all of these changes that are happening? A lot of teams are adopting different tooling and trying things out. What is real? What isn't? How are the best teams actually adopting this technology behind the scenes? And then the third is we're going to give a demo of the actual platform and go a little bit deeper into some of the new features that we have in Cursor, talk about the roadmap that we have for some of the upcoming months, and then leave hopefully about a half or a third of the call for a bunch of question and answer on the biggest things that are on all of your minds. So really excited to go through it. I'm gonna kick us off with a 5 or 10 minute overview, pass it over to Eric, who's gonna jump in the demo, and we'll take it from there. So Cursor, our parent company, or the company corporate name, is actually AnySphere. And the vision of AnySphere, as you see here, is to automate coding. Really, when we zoom out, we look at this as this crazy time in the world where this entire profession is going to change quite a bit. We felt this when the company started 2.5, 3 years ago. Also feel it increasingly so today. I think we've watched a progressive amount of code, even internally and with a lot of our customers, start to be generated by AI, or at least originated by AI and edited by AI. And as this space continues to move forward, only see it progressing more. And when you think about that, I think you have to think about it not just as like a tool that one is choosing today, but have to think about it as a job that is going to change into the future. And one thing that we hold really close to our hearts here at Cursor is that if we are to be successful in the space, the tool probably looks completely different 12 to 18 months from today than it does right now. Now, a really core part of our thesis is that the center of this all is still going to be the human. And rather than a world where everything is like completely automated and like a full AGI scene where code is all getting written itself, we hope to be able to take away a lot of the rote and the toil work so that engineers can focus on higher leverage work behind the scenes. And this has really been there from the beginning in the way that we think about our approach. Wave one, when I think about a lot of the coding assistants that came out, was really focused on extensions and plugins. Now, the upside of the extensions and plugins is that it's really easy to get started. It's built back from this age-old concept that everyone's pretty familiar with of the editor already. The downside of this is I think it's built from a little bit shaky of a foundation if you do believe this space is going to change so much over the course of the coming years. And if the job is going to change, I think the tool needs to have the flexibility to be able to adopt that. Cursor is one of the very first players that started what I'd consider wave two of the AI code gen tools. And wave two is about not just this bolted on backend plugin, but really owning the entire experience end to end. The way I like to think about it is it's one thing to just inject LLMs or AI capabilities into a product. It's another thing to really build a comprehensive product where this is at the core of everything that you're doing. For that, Cursor created entirely an editor of its own rather than just existing as an extension, saying, hey, this is not just going to be this LLM research problem. It's going to be, how do you apply that? Think about it like you can put the food on the table, but people still have to eat it. We really focused on that second part of the challenge when we started to build out the product. We've seen a lot of people start to use Cursor, which has been really cool. We're at a place now where 53% of Fortune 1000 companies have engineers using Cursor, and hundreds of millions of lines of code are used every single day behind the scenes. And we're really excited to get to a point where we continue to be able to serve larger and larger organizations and think about some of the media problems as you start to move into code bases that are even larger behind the scenes. This is a little bit of background. Let's talk a little bit more like brass tacks about some of the product decisions that were actually made and how you experience Cursor today. As I mentioned, this is not just an extension. This is entirely an IDE of its own. So some of you may have tried out Cursor, but you do download it as a desktop application. The idea here, again, being that we really need to own that whole experience end to end. And when you talk to a lot of the developers that love Cursor, there's kind of this intangible thing that's a little bit hard to measure in numbers, other than I think the usage numbers on Cursor oftentimes look higher than even other tools people have used in the space. You hear these quotes like, AI is in all the right places for me. It feels very additive to the experience. And by controlling, again, not just the LLM capabilities, but also the product experiences and thinking about it as an applied LLM challenge, it's really been a foundation of how we thought about providing this experience to our end users. Now, again, we didn't just do this completely from scratch. We also decided to rely on, a beloved foundation, VS Code, used by 70 to 80% of the world's developers. The idea here really coming back from two things, security and familiarity. Makes it super easy to still get started. If you download Cursor, 2 clicks, all your key bindings, your extensions, your settings are all the way ported over, and you're up and ready to go. The third thing I'll mention that was a really core thing for us from the beginning was this idea that code base awareness was going to be extremely important. And especially as you get inside of larger code bases behind the scenes, what was going to be important was really being able to include increasing amounts of it as part of the context window. So what Cursor does is anytime you're pulling in a file, folder, or project into the editor, we're creating embeddings of that we're then doing retrieval on as part of the response that we're giving you. So other players in the space historically had gone like directly from the editor, taken the snippet that you put in there, taken it to an AI endpoint and brought it back to you. We introduced this step in the middle where we're actually doing a lot of the prompt crafting and creation, pulling in all of this context from around your code base, which really just leads to much more accurate responses behind the scenes. This behind the scenes manifests in a couple of really key features and functionality. The key one that really came out first was Cursor Tab. Cursor Tab I like to think of as the senior engineer that's over your shoulder. This is structurally different than autocomplete, which a lot of other players have done in this space. Historically, autocomplete is looked a little bit more like Gmail. You're writing a sentence and you might click something like tab and it completes the last few words. We took a structurally different approach where we actually built entirely an in-house model to be able to do this. The idea of the model was it was a smaller model to keep latency really great, but a much larger context window than folks had seen in the past. What this means is it truly is next action or next edit prediction, where it can do multi-line diffs. Let's say you're writing a line of code, line 7, you might click tab, jumps down to line 240 because it knows there's a dependency. Click tab again, it jumps back up. Really tries to keep this inflow experience where basically what's happening is the last 5 to 10 minutes of you writing code, it's almost like warming up the model and including that as part of the context window that then is predicting the entire next bit. In fact, early on, this wasn't called Cursor Tab, it was called Cursor Tab, because the idea was that you could keep pressing tab and it would keep predicting more and more of your use cases behind the scenes. So phase 1 is, okay, you have this great senior developer that's over your shoulder. I like to think of the next step as the senior developer that's across the table from you. So Command K bleeding into the chat as well, you have the option to ask really specific questions to your code base. I like to think about this as, a lot of companies, there's like the OG developer that has been there maybe, 10 years or 15 years longer than anybody else. And, normally you have to go up to them, grab a coffee, ask them about some old war stories, basically. And instead, you get to ask that directly inside the editor with that contextual awareness that I was talking about before to make sure you have really accurate and precise responses for what you're looking for. Really, the last feature that I'll really call out is Cursor Chat and the agent. And this is really what has taken the Cursor experience to the next level. The idea here is that you can use human language to complete tasks end to end. So if we have the senior developer over your shoulder, the senior developer across the table from you, this is now a developer who you can delegate work to. And the idea here, again, is that the agent is picking its own context. It's able to pull in all these different tool calls like MCP, which Eric will talk about in a little bit, and actually be able to do task completion. We see teams really accelerate processes around things like unit tests, refactoring a code base, thinking about architecting things from scratch. We'll also talk a little bit later about some of the biggest use cases that we've seen successfully used here behind the scenes. But you pull all three of these together, and we really think of it as this comprehensive platform for you to be able to accelerate the way that your development team writes code. Here, oftentimes from our most successful teams, that we're seeing 30 to 40% productivity gains on the individual developer. And most importantly, I think this is just the beginning. I think we're still living in a world right now where a lot of this is an accelerant to the existing developer's workflow. And the next step for us is also thinking about all the different ways that we will expand beyond this to actually think about larger surface area, where if you really do imagine this world where 12 to 18 months, the space has changed a lot, we're thinking about all the ways that we're going to include different tools behind the scenes here. I'll get back to talking a little bit more about our roadmap. The last thing I want to briefly touch on before I pass it off to Eric is how we actually work with a lot of our enterprise customers, which is a really big question. We do not take it lightly that this is a lot of trust being put into a platform like us behind the scenes. The TLDR here is we have something called the enforced privacy mode guarantee or the privacy mode guarantee. The idea is on our enterprise or our business plans that we have behind the scenes, we guarantee that no raw code data is ever stored or used for training. And when we've worked with the thousands, tens of thousands of teams behind the scenes, this is really the most important guarantee that if you're going to trust us by having a code data process behind the scenes, we're not going to train on that, and we're not going to persist any of the raw code data behind the scenes. Gone to the lengths of doing, full compliance pieces, pretty extensive annual pen tests, SOC 2 Type 2 certification, SSO behind the scenes with SAML 2.0, a lot of the rigorous features that you would expect from the key enterprise products. And we've gone through security reviews with very large Fortune 100 companies and gotten to deployments with them. So really at a place where we can help serve some of the larger enterprise customers, even in industries where that historically has been a little bit harder. And obviously, we'd be really excited to do that with everyone here too. But that's enough from me talking and yapping on all of this. Let's get to the more exciting part of this, which is Eric sharing a little bit more of some of the features and functionalities inside of Cursor through a demo. I will pass it off over to you, Eric.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan. Hey, everyone. Very excited to be here and show you all how to use Cursor. Let me just share my screen here. I think we're good to go. So I figured we walk through some of the core features, some of the more advanced features, and yeah, there's so much to talk about, so we'll have to condense it a bit here. Okay, so what we're seeing here is Cursor, and we want to cover the tab, which is autocomplete, Command K, and then chat, like Jordan mentioned, but also going a bit further with looking at the rules, MCP, docs, these kind of peripheral features that makes Cursor really good in a team environment. So the code here is a pretty simple fast API app for user management. It's a Python app, and Cursor really performs well for the most common languages, where it has seen a lot of training data on this. So what we can see here is simple app. We have some middleware. We have included this here. So first thing I want to show you is how to use Command K. So if we position our cursor right around here and we hit Command K, we're going to see this small input field for instructions. And we're also going to see this little highlighted code block. And these two together make up for the final prompt. And this is going to get sent to the model, and back from the model, we're going to get the results. So this code in particular is kind of insecure. So we can ask the model to make it more secure. And we can see that it traverses line by line and edits where it's most, or where it's needed. And from here, we can either go ahead and refine the results even further, or we can go ahead and accept certain lines, or we can just go ahead and accept everything altogether. And that's what I'm going to do for now. So Command K is really good if you want to make those very like surgical edits where you don't want to do it line by line, but you know kind of what the scope is of the change you want to do. Okay, so that's Command K. Let's jump into some of the more the endpoints of the actual API here and see how we can use that. So let's go to the router from API. And we don't really have anything here except for user database, which is in memory for now. But we can already see that a cursor has picked up that we're building this user management API, and we see this ghost text here. I think you're pretty familiar with autocomplete models and similar. So what we can do now is just press tab, and we can get the create user. And then we can see that, okay, we're missing some kind of user here. So we can actually go ahead and define this. And Cursor immediately picks up that, okay, we need to define a model here. And up here, we can see that we're missing the import. And still, Cursor understands that we need to import this. Okay, nice. So let's go ahead and continue. So we have the create endpoint. Now we're getting the read endpoint. And we're also getting the updates. And we can pretty much just keep on tabbing here. And keep on tabbing. And now we're seeing that we're starting to get here outer roles. So this is great. And so what happens is when you actually press tab, you inject intent to the model and basically tell the model like, hey, this is good, keep on doing this. And this is kind of like how Cursor works under the hood. And so we're looking at where your actual cursor is and see like what kind of code is around the cursor and what is contextual here. And from that, we can figure out what is needed to be output. So we've seen Command K. This was tab. Let's open up the sidebar here. And this is the chat. This is the cursor chat. And here we can do a lot of the multi-file edits, such as like using the agent or chatting with your code base, onboarding yourself. Maybe you have like an error message that you want to find the origin of. This is a great place to do it. We have a lot of things here that we don't have the time to go through, but we'd love to some other time. But for now, we're going to look into, okay, so let's say we have this API here. How can we actually write a test? Because we should all test the code, right? And what is fun with agent and cursor and AI development in general is that test-driven development seems to be a really good workflow to actually use the AI models. And when you have a test, you essentially have an assertion for the model to say like, hey, was my output good or was it bad? And if the model sees that the tests are not passing, it can understand that, hey, we should probably do some other implementation here and fix it. So let's try that. Implement a test for. So what we're doing here is like we're adding the file and we're giving this file as context to the model. So we're forcing the model to read the file and take that into consideration when generating the test. And the chat has also access to the terminal, so you can run terminal commands. And this creates this kind of self-healing loop almost. And we're just going to see this in a moment. So we can see that it started generating a test file. It has a test client. And now it's just going to go ahead and do its own thing. And we can see that it's using UV, and I'll show you why in a minute. But yeah, and we can see that it also ran the test and it actually passed on the first try. So that was great. And we get a little summary here at the end of what actually changed. So I'm just going to go ahead and accept this. So you can kind of see where this can go, where you can do multi-file edits across large code bases, being very precise with the context. And we're going to share you a little bit later how you can work in larger code bases in general. Okay, awesome. So as I mentioned, we saw that it was using UV, which is kind of not the standard when working with this. And the way we're forcing the model to do this is through something called cursor rules. And cursor rules, you can think of this as the kind of a prompt, underlying prompt that we give to the model. And this is going to be included in the context and steer the direction of the model in however way you want it to go. So in this case, we have a Python MDC file, which is just text. And this is going to be included in every single prompt. And in this case, we say, okay, always use UV and default to Python 3.12. And these are some of the more powerful features that you can use when you're working in a team. So for example, you might have specific rules for specific services or specific teams, whether that might be style guides or other like implicit rules that are really not really like written down somewhere. Those are really good to put into the cursor rules. And one powerful thing you can do with cursor rules as well is actually to write workflows. And what I mean with that is you can specify a step-by-step list and what kind of things you want the model to do, and then it's just going to do it for you. So here we can see an example where we have a small review rule, and this essentially is going to run git diff, check the output of the diff to see like what they would change from the last commit. We can ask the model to do a light review of the code and check for like performance and security issues. And if we feel like, or if the model feels like everything looks good, there are no critical issues, we're going to ask it to commit for us. So these are one of the actual workflows that you can do. But you can think of this as you can put in security scanning or compliance scanning, any kind of thing where you want it to automatically check for stuff through a CLI. That works really well. Cool. So that was rules. The next thing I want to show you is kind of like how you can integrate your specific context into Cursor. So while the base models are really good and just using your code base is produces very good output, what really makes it great is to bring your own context into Cursor. And what I mean with that is using something like Jira or Linear or Confluence or any kind of internal documentation that might be describing the state of things and having taxonomy, for example, that the model might not be aware of otherwise. For that, you can use MCP. And MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And you can think of this as a very thin integration layer to bring in any kind of external data source into Cursor. So in this case, Cursor is the MCP client or MCP host, and you can add MCP servers. What I've defined here is a Postgres server. So if I just hit Command I and I do Command N to start a new chat, I can ask the model to like, what's in my Postgres database. And now it's actually going to understand like, okay, I have access to a tool to use Postgres, and it's actually going to write the SQL query for me and do this meta schema to find out which tables do I have. And this can be really powerful whenever you're working with like data analysis or building a dashboard or any kind of place where you need the contextual awareness of how your database schema looks like. And you can generalize this concept by essentially pulling in everything you need. Like it could be a Google Drive or a Notion database or even browser context if you're having net console logs that are erroring, etc. And these are actually one of the things that we're working quite a lot on, thinking how can we bring more context into Cursor from the various systems you're using. Cool. So that was a high-level overview of MCP. could probably spend a couple of hours on this alone, but I'm going to move on to docs, which is kind of the last thing that
Eric,
is very,
on that topic really quickly,
yeah.
I know we've seen some people do some pretty incredible things with MCP. What are a few of the other examples that have stuck out to you as some of the most interesting use cases or some of the most creative things people have put together?
In terms of creative stuff, I've seen someone get a phone call whenever the chat is done. I think that takes the prize for most creative. In terms of actually useful, that would be connecting to like Jira and pulling in specific tickets, and having the model implement the changes and then creating a PR just from one single go. Um, but then also for debugging, I think those are kind of the most valuable ones, where it actually can collect more context. So what we're thinking of, web is one platform that is has been easy to develop on, but then you have either integrated systems or getting logs from like your logging system, or perhaps building an iOS app and getting context from Xcode or Android Studio. And we just want to make this easier for everyone to build on top of as well. So yeah, I would say those are some of the most interesting MCPs I've seen so far. But it's a very evolving field, and the latest MCP specification landed yesterday for adding authentication and even more methods to pull in more context. So we can expect this field to expand a lot, especially during the coming months. And now even ChatGPT added MCP support to their client. So it's here to stay.
Eric, while you're on MCP, do you mind just touching, there was a question on security using MCP with production code.
Yes, of course. So if we just look at this MCP definition here, we can see that this server is actually running locally. And what I've done previously is, or any MCP server is running locally if you wanted to. Then of course you can have federated servers that you can host yourself and have only you connect to them. So you're in full charge of all the codes that goes through the MCP server, and yeah, how it works under the hood. Then, of course, if you're using open source, it's always good practice to vet the code first. But mostly you can clone it and change it to however you want it to work.
And this is one area where, especially with a lot of our larger enterprise customers, we end up being pretty hands-on and helping folks out. I think one advantage of Cursor is it's really easy to get started. I think sometimes the more open question is like, how do we make sure this is deeply embedded into the workflows of our team? And we are happy to share more examples of how some of the most successful, really large enterprises have thought about pulling stuff in. We've seen one of our largest customers do something where they have a lot of their historical training process even happen through an MCP, where they'd created an in-house huge vector database of all of their historical documentation, onboarding things. And one of the tool calls is actually an MCP that's connected with their internal learning module, basically, that can be called from the team. We've seen organizations do this with their design systems as well. And our team's more than happy to help organizations think about how they want to set this up and do it in a secure manner inside of their code base.
Eric, one question. So have you seen anyone probably hooking this to their logs or to telemetry data to resolve the issues automatically, or improving the performance of the APIs using the telemetry data?
I've seen some people integrate Datadog specifically and pulling in logs or like integrating with their API and being able to pull in metrics and telemetry and also logs to figure out where in the code base this is happening, but also how you can improve it.
Yeah. I mean, another way we've seen this is people will pull in, for example, like tickets that come in to say like a linear, pull them into here and then like have an automatic stab of what it looks like to self-resolve that ticket, or put up almost an end-to-end PR for what it looked like to solve that. And I think like on the spectrum of these agents getting better and better and more autonomous, we're really excited about heading in that direction. Awesome. We will
Sweet.
keep going and talk about app docs and other ways to pull in context. And by the way, one thing I'll shout out is just we are really big believers that the more context you can give a model, the better output it's going to have. And one of our visions for the future is actually one where we've done a lot of experimentation around fine tuning, and a lot of other players in the space have tried out doing this. And it's kind of a sexy thing to sell a fine-tuned model custom made for your individual company based on your code base. And really what we found time and time again is just having a larger context window and including the right context inside of it has been a lot more productive and efficient at giving you better code quality than actually the fine tuning path. So much of this functionality that we're showing off today is built back from this idea of like, how do we make it as easy as possible to pull in as much context as possible to really give the model some guidelines in the code that it's giving back to you behind the scenes. I'll pass it over to Eric.
Yes, and speaking of context, we have various different ways to like provide context to the model, and it's a good mental model is imagine you're onboarding a new engineer and to the first day, like what would you tell them about your code base and what kind of context would you give them? If you give the same to the model, it's probably going to perform equally well. So that's like a small tip to boost kind of the quality and the output, and just to front load everything, because the less the agent has to guess, the faster it's going to be and the more accurate it's going to be. But yeah, and lastly, I just want to show you docs and how you can leverage like public documentation for knowledge that the foundational models might not be as good as. So if we go into settings and then features and then scroll down a bit, you can provide links to, for example, PyTorch in this case. It can be like language or framework or anything public really, where the information from that source is relevant as context from the code you're generating. Cursor Docs is a classic example where you can share it with this Cursor documentation. And what's really good is if one person in your teams add this doc, they will be sharing it with the team. So what happens under the hood is that we on our server go out and scrape the page and all the sub pages, etc., and chunk it up and then provide a search engine on top of the actual documentation. So then you can add the docs, and we're going to pull the relevant pieces of the docs into the actual context when needed. And worth mentioning is that we're working on a lot of these, improving some of the more enterprise features around documentation and pulling in context in general. We have a lot of customers who have internal design systems and documentation, etc., behind like VPNs and proxies too. So making sure that all this information is accessible through Cursor is very important. Okay, I think that was pretty much it for the high-level overview. That was very quick, and there's more stuff to go over, but for now, I think we're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Eric, Jordan. I know there's like a million ways that we could go, and there were a few topics that before we open it up for questions, I just want to pose because they came up so frequently. And the first one, and I hear it all the time from the portfolio companies I work with, is like you hear these stats like this many lines of code written by AI and things like that, but how do we actually tie it to impact and productivity? And what are some of the best practices and approaches that you're seeing work really well with customers, maybe small or large?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a super important one. There was this first iteration of this where I think folks really just focused on only the number of lines of code that were written by AI. Said, hey, it's all about quantity. So much more code is getting produced. The issue with this is, well, yeah, maybe you have a million more lines of code, but if it's all garbage code that's getting pushed up into a repository, that's not a good thing. In fact, it would be incredible if it cut the number of lines of code in half in a project and it still performed in exactly the same way. I say that to say, like, I think there's this quality piece that's really important behind the scenes. And what I see the best teams doing when they're trying to evaluate things behind the scenes here is they break it into a couple categories. One is this more quantitative category where we try and really pull some numbers and integrate into DX stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And the second category that surprisingly ends up being honestly more impactful than not oftentimes is this qualitative category of thinking about some well-designed surveys for actually asking your team how they interface with these different tools. In this first category of quantitative, there is the like quantity and the quality question. On the quantity side, we try and give you a lot of information behind the scenes. We have like a analytics product that's included as part of our enterprise suite here at Cursor that gives you a full dashboard that goes a little bit deeper. We are tracking things behind the scenes, like not just the number of lines of code generated by AI, but also the number of lines edited and the number of lines deleted, which is really interesting to see of how the model's actually having interaction. Next week, we're actually shipping another feature, which we're really excited about as well, which is going to give you the percentage of a PR that is actually generated by Cursor. So not just like, was this play code that was written, but what actually made it up into a PR as a proxy for the quality that you're actually going to see behind the scenes. We also give some other interesting information to you, things like the total line changes that are coming out of Cursor, the acceptance rate, which is a really important one as well, like not just how many things is AI giving you, but how many is a user actually accepting? Again, another proxy for quality behind the scenes. And then a little bit of a breakdown of stuff like the languages that are being used and things like this. I think we want to strike this really careful middle ground here of any metric you put out there is very easy to be gamified. And one example is this: is you could have a really high acceptance rate, but all of the suggestions were like a semicolon. And you might have a lower acceptance rate, but like the great suggestions that are being given are like 3 really critical pieces of code that would have taken someone an hour and a half of Stack Overflow research to actually put in there behind the scenes. So we're trying to give you the most amount of information to see, again, both that like quantity side, but also the quality of the code that is produced behind the scenes. And we will help as you continue to use Cursor, try and paint this picture again, both in our analytics product and then also in ways that our team can help paint that picture of what ROI of using a tool like this looks like. On the more qualitative side, we've seen this. I'll give you an example. We just did a big rollout with a big public financial technology company, and we spent several weeks really properly setting up all the ways to track these metrics, all these numbers I just talked to you about, and they were just going to roll out with that. We said, hey, can we ask you guys to do one other thing? Can you do a survey where you ask your team a couple of things? Most importantly, like, what is their favorite tool and why? What is their self-reported productivity, and why do they like the tool that they love? They had 5 or 6 different tools in place, and at the end of the trial or the POC that we'd done together, the numbers were super helpful, obviously, to make the financial case, but they actually just relatively threw those out the window. 92% of their developers said they preferred Cursor compared to all the other tools they'd used, and self-reported productivity gains of 30 to 35%. And hearing stuff like that from developers, I think, is still really important. And I think the threshold for having an impact on teams right now is low compared to how impactful this technology can be applied to the right space. So, putting all this together, I do think we try and give you a lot of data behind the scenes to make the case, and then also are happy to share best practices around how we think about measuring through surveys and other DX style things, what the impact of tools like Cursor actually looks like.
Jordan, I'm excited about that feature next week. I know a lot of our portfolio companies are going to find value in sort of just tracking productivity.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing to see. I mean, one example I even give you is when we first launched Agent or Composer, we saw that some of our power user teams had like roughly 5% of their code originated by AI. When I see where this has gone, even in the last 6 months, our top decile teams are seeing like 35 to 40% plus of their code now being originated by AI that are actually making it up into a PR. And it's like pretty wild to think about what the future is going to look like if that number keeps moving up in that direction as quickly as it has been historically.
Speaking of that ROI impact, are there certain teams or programming languages that, as you deploy into an enterprise setting, you see adopting first and most efficiently, like front end versus back end or mobile or specific languages?
It's a good question. There have been a few patterns, but overall, I think we really try and push teams during a POC with us to really see how it's going to specifically roll out in their organization and make sure they're including folks of all different backgrounds, more senior, more junior, front end, back end, this language, that language. A few patterns that we do see with Cursor are it's built back from VS Code as a foundation. So if your team is primarily using IntelliJ or a JetBrains product or something like that, for example, it's like switching from a JetBrains product to VS Code to a degree, and adoption patterns tend to be a little bit more immediate. Still seen a lot of teams switch, but kind of the double-edged sword of working backwards from a product like that. We also tend to see like relatively bimodal usage, interestingly, in that we have almost equal adoption rates across more junior and senior engineers, but the features they adopt are different. Where a lot more of the senior engineers are really power users of tab and the next edit prediction, where it's this more inflow experience, where this is kind of the maybe more historical experience that they're used to, where more junior developers have been quicker and faster adopters of chat and some of the more agent style features and functionalities. So really the thing that I push is like try and think about that cohorting inside of an organization and try and pull in folks from different teams to see how this looks. This is working back from state-of-the-art models behind the scenes that have been trained on a lot of code data. So it's generally applicable across all different languages. Cursor also, it's not just the state-of-the-art models behind the scenes. It is this collection of in-house models like Cursor Tab, and the way that once a code suggestion is given to you, how it's applied into your code base for our apply model, the way we do indexing, stuff like this behind the scenes. So generally should have a lot of applicability across all different languages and settings inside of your team.
Awesome. One question that came up, and I think we'll make this probably the last question, and then we'll go to questions that have come through the chat. So, or that do come through the chat. So please put any burning questions. And if you see a good one that you like, give it a heart, and we'll try and get to the most liked ones first. But a lot of feedback is that code generated by AI can have low reusability. Just any tips on improving reusability and getting more out of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is something that will continue to evolve over time. I mean, I think this is really the thing where this pitch again on like including more context makes it really helpful. I think it is still a place where, as it works with any code model, like the worse, I think it's kind of actually like working with a human. It's like the less instructions and less specific you are with a human, probably the worse that they're going to do on a task. And I think about very similar with a model. If you're like, hey, please fix this, it's probably going to do a worse job than if you have actually given it a lot of context on the exact depth of the problem behind the scenes. I think part of this is on how we think about training our engineering teams. And when we work with a lot of large organizations, this is kind of an evolving question. Like at first, the tool is built for the work, and then the work changes for the tool. And when that happens, we have to think about how we continue to educate and train our teams through like developer experience divisions to actually understand how the workflow and the way of interacting with code and what the job changing actually means for them behind the scenes. I think beyond that, this is also, again, like coming back to this context piece, which I know is a drum I keep beating, but it's an important one. We try and really do a great job with auto context to make sure it's not just boilerplate, but that it's super specific to the project that's working within. And this is really what we've optimized for. It's very different to just use a tool that's like in a completely project from scratch when you're working on a weekend side project. When we're going inside of a enterprise monorepo that has 850,000 files within it, there's so much rich context there. And we actually think more of the fruit that we're going to see is not just the raw code that's generated, but the raw code in the way it's applied inside of this large code base and the specifics we can actually give folks in making sure it's applicable to their experience. So Eric, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I think you've seen some cool examples of people really pulling in great frameworks, using Cursor rules, things like this to hit a home run here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, someone who's been working with this like firsthand, there's a saying that it's better to repeat code than to implement the wrong abstraction. And this Cursor has really helped me to do this because I can do more specific implementations to where I don't really reuse the code. But whenever I feel like I need to reuse the code, it's much easier for me to go back and actually abstract some of the code that I've actually implemented. And with Cursor, who can actually search the code base and like find similar patterns, you don't really fall into this place where it's a lot of unusable code or non-reusable code. And to even further like improve this, we've seen some people add cursor rules specifically for this. So when you're working with some kind of abstraction, use the cursor rule. Also using cursor rules for boilerplates, etc. Oh, might have lost you there. I think we're back.
We got you.
So yeah, gotcha. Perfect. So yeah, all in all, I think it's helping with reusable code because it makes it easier to actually understand what it should be reusable and what shouldn't.
Thank you. Well, we got one very highly voted question, and then we'll just go through and keep going through some of the highest rated ones that come up in the chat. One from Daron about how well does Cursor perform with very large mono repo code bases? Specifically, how effectively does it reuse existing utilities and services when generating new code?
Yes, this is a great question. This has been a really big update for us in the past 2 weeks, even. Historically, Cursor has relied on off-the-shelf models to do indexing and embeddings for us behind the scenes. We have completely rewritten this in-house. Historically, the limit was 100,000 files inside of a repo, which obviously was constraining for organizations. We had several customers where they'd started to push upwards of millions of files that had happened that they wanted to get indexed behind the scenes. We've rewritten this in-house, which should now handle significantly larger repositories, and have now also added in a piece where this way that indexing is done can be shared across the team. So once this is done for one individual user, we will actually use that to speed up the process for other users behind the scenes as part of your team, where historically it's kind of been done on a user by user basis. So the idea here is that it's now happening a lot more quickly with a model that's in-house, and we're really excited to continue to roll this out to a lot of the teams that we have behind the scenes. I'd be curious, Jordan, if there are other pieces that I'd be curious to go deeper on when you talk about like utilities and services for new code. And one thing I'll also add in there, by the way, is the way that indexing works with Cursor is it's actually an ongoing thing. So it's not just like it happens once and then we like set it and forget it. It's actually pinging every 5 minutes to see if there have been changes in the file folder project you're working in, and then re-indexing the changes. So it's always staying up to date on the context that's been given behind the scenes.
I guess also worth mentioning is that we're building Cursor with Cursor every day, and the VS Code base is quite huge. So we're facing these challenges almost every single day, and making sure that we actually build a solution for it.
Thank you. Daron, any follow-ups on that, or should we move to the next?
No, sounds good. Regarding the services, so thing that I felt with different tooling is that sometimes the machine doesn't really understand correctly all the services that you have, and then when you ask it to do some task, it generates the code that do it, but we already have a utility or a service or something that already done it. So how well Cursor understand the services and the classes and whatever you have in your repository to reuse the same services that you already have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're continuing to improve what that experience looks like behind the scenes. And the hope is, especially with the way that we increase the fidelity in which indexing happens, that we start to make sure a lot of the services are also included in what's given back out to you. And yeah, I think like the V1 stab here again, or maybe now the V2 stab, has been making sure we can serve really, really large code bases. And now it's saying, what are other pieces of context that are not included there that also might be helpful for us to pull in? And MCP has been a really interesting stab at that. But I think there's a lot of bandwidth for us to keep growing what this functionality actually looks like behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Any?
I see several questions that are popping up, by the way, around native support of Kotlin, of Scala, of Xcode, of other things. I know this is a hot topic. This has been one that is probably the #1 piece of feedback we oftentimes get, and again, it's kind of this double-edged sword piece where I know that the language or like the LSP support that we give at Cursor is probably not optimized for other languages, especially coming from editors where they're very purpose-built with their own LSP for processing behind the scenes. This is not on a short-term roadmap. I do think longer term, there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about the layer of abstraction that we're playing at and how we actually make support better for individual languages, and even things like a lot of teams we are working with, especially like consumer companies, for example, that do have mobile applications, want to think about how we can support these type of languages more natively inside of Cursor. And it is something that's on top of mind for us right now. There's not like a great out-of-box solution other than some like extensions and augmentation folks have used inside of VS Code.
There was a set of questions asked before the meeting, and I think one that Eric asked just now, which is around as the code commit sizes or PR sizes grow, are there best practices or recommendations you have to maintain PR discipline, or best practices on the CI/CD and testing side to make sure you avoid committing and PRing bugs?
Yeah, I think when I think about where our roadmap is headed, I think there's a lot that we can do here. Even one area, for example, that I think about is code review. Like it's pretty funny that code review happens outside of the editor right now, oftentimes. And in fact, if we do think increasing percentage of code is going to be originated by AI, I don't think this is just going to get like blindly checked into a repo. I think the human's job is going to become increasingly focused on quality control of that code behind the scenes. And that when we think about code review, well, you're kind of giving like great human language comments on the code that would be greatly interpreted by a model to think about making improvements. I'd mentioned this in the chat, even a V1 feature that we've worked on here that's in beta, but you can enable it live inside of Cursor in the beta settings right now, is the bug finder, which is the idea of giving custom prompting and specific instructions for a model to actually look through code before it's pushed. And we think that there's a lot of runway for us to think about how we bring in tooling like this natively inside of the editor. We kind of think of the editor as like not just the editor of the past 15 or 20 years. We think of it as this like portal or the best place to meet people where they're at, to give them all this functionality in one place behind the scenes. In the meantime, like the onus is also, and I keep going back to this training piece. I think like a really big topic that a lot of organizations are grappling with is like, as the job changes, how do we need to think about scaling training inside of our organization and rethinking what it means to give our developers the right skill set, and even like interview people with the right skill set and mentality around what it means to start coding in an era of AI. And I think this is going to be a continually evolving space for the best teams to figure out and really have a great experience for their team and the quality of code that's pushed.
Awesome.
There are a lot of other questions.
Maybe Jordan, if you want to pick one other from the chat that you think would be, useful for the group to hear, and then we can save time at the end just to talk about how folks can follow up with you and
Sure.
learn more.
Eric, any stick out to you?
I was just about to answer the anyways, you're seeing teams of developers leverage Cursor in ways different than it might be solo developers. So what I'm seeing here from working with a lot of our customers is essentially building tooling around Cursor itself. And that might be using Cursor to build kind of code review flows, or that might be building MCP servers or any kind of context gathering to make sure that, again, everything is available to Cursor and it can leverage the context to generate the code. Whereas for sole developers, they might be going more of a careless route, like auto committing all the time, and leveraging like other MCP servers to pull in very like random things into their code base. So it might not be using rules as much. So I would encourage everyone to kind of like think about how the processes you're doing for developing code, and if there are any of these that could actually be automated through a Cursor rule or defined as a workflow or like SOP. And from there, you can get a lot of leverage with your time.
Actually, this one last question I think is probably just good for folks to hear before as they think about signing up or purchasing Cursor for their teams. Are there any security differences across the plans?
Yes. So basically 2 basic plans we have right now, the Pro plan and the business plan. The biggest difference is the Pro plan is really meant for individuals, and the enterprise or the business plan is meant for teams. So the Pro plan, it's like 1 person per account. There's no centralized billing. There's no admin dashboard. There's no centralized control behind the scenes. On the business plan, you're going to get administrator versus like user separate status, where an admin will be able to centralize team billing, have this analytics product presented to them behind the scenes, and then really importantly, enforce privacy mode top down across the organization. So if you're on the Pro plan, the individual developer gets to choose if they want to share data with Cursor or if they want to enforce privacy mode. On the business plan, anyone that joins your team is covered by this enforced privacy mode guarantee by default, which will make sure none of your raw code data is ever stored or used for training. So a very helpful piece just to ensure you're meeting that compliance there behind the scenes. I know we have just 2 minutes left. The last thing, hopefully the most exciting thing, and we saved the best for last, is we're really excited to extend all Bessemer Portcos a free month of Cursor Business for unlimited developers on your team. The way we think about it is this is not a space in which you can shove a tool on people's throats. We want to make it super easy for all of you to get started, try it out with your team. We will work with you to work through any problems, troubleshooting, stuff like this, and think about what it could look like to perhaps even have a longer term relationship if you're loving the tool. The way that we'll do that is follow up with an email from Talia and the BVP crew on exactly how you can get access there and get in touch with our team. We'll enable that for you all behind the scenes. We'll send out basically a quick form for you to fill out. That'll make sure we get you all the right access and route to the right folks to kick that off.
Awesome. Well, so I will follow up on email to everyone who registered. If for whatever reason you joined and you didn't register and someone on your team just sent you the link, or you don't get the follow-up from me, I put my email in the chat, talia@bvp.com, and we'll make sure to connect you with the Cursor team. And thank you guys so much for giving this opportunity to our portfolio companies, sharing the best practices, and of course, making it easy for folks to get started.